The Newbery Medal isn't about my book or any book. It's about the invisible fellowship of librarians, publishers, parents, teachers, and writers who want to give their best to children. The Newbery Medal is a symbol of our communion. We are threaded together by our commitment to children and the life of the mind. We dance together on one string. And now it is time to say thank you, and to try to say it simply, purely, as Tessa did. Thank you for coming here tonight, for being readers, for knowing that children and books matter. Thank you, my parents, for opening the world of books to me. Thank you, my friends from the Park School, for helping me write and for helping me rejoice. And last of all, thank you, members of the Newbery Committee, for feeding my bears and granting me my heart's desire.
Now one day, he looked out and he saw an old woman coming up the track near his cottage. And he thought maybe she'd come to buy a jar of honey. So he went out to the gate to meet her, and the hare went with him.
But one specific thing I remember is I was coming back from tutor. And I hated going to tutor, particularly because I had to miss library, which was like the worst punishment in the entire world. Not only did I have to do extra math, I had to miss library class with Laura. And I'd gotten in a fight with her over something, the tutor. And I came back, and I remember Laura just putting her arm around me and sort of walking me down by a shelf of books and repeating bits of the story she told the class. And she was always just the most warm and loving person and was so kind to everyone. It was unbelievable.
I remember we were studying Native American history and literature in 3rd grade, and we did this one activity where we had to find our spirit animals. So we just kind of went out to this bridge, and the bridge separating the campus from the woods, and we all sat on the bridge, and she did this meditation exercise, and it was just really tranquil and calming, and her voice just sort of soothes and relaxes, and it's a very, I don't know, it'd be interesting to have her read a story to the upper schoolers, because I think we've all forgotten almost what it's like, but I don't know, it's nice. It's a very calming experience.
So when did you start writing stories?
I remember writing a poem, or asking my mother to write down a poem I'd thought of. I started writing stories pretty early. By 5th grade, I was taking little packets of paper out on the playground at recess. I know I did some writing in 4th grade, and I guess probably around 3rd.
Do you remember what you were reading then? And was that sort of...
Yeah, of course I copied what I read.
I mean, that's all I ever...
Yeah.
I did that
And of
for
course,
a very long time.
like my childhood poetry, a lot of it is quite didactic, because that's what I was reading.
Of course.
So I would write these little moral poems about,
the way to behave.
Yeah.
What a good girl does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my parents were just about perfect, because when I showed them something I'd written, they were pretty much thrilled with it. They loved it. And then they sort of forgot about it.
Oh, that seems right.
And I sometimes...
They didn't frame it and put it up and
No.
erect a shrine.
Or, talk about revising it, or deciding that I was so special that I had to take a course, and, or that I needed to be published. They just, they were thrilled with it, and then we went on with our lives. Although I do remember with some amusement, going to my parents once. It was the first time I'd finished something, and I think it was around 4th grade, and it was this story about this black pig that was shipwrecked on a desert island with an impertinent goat. Who of course kind of loosened her up, 'cause she's not a very nice pig.
and but they had to depend on each other to survive. You know, I finally finished something, you know, and it had illustrations because I could put the stuffed animals on the page and draw around them. So they were better pictures than I could have drawn freehand. And I wanted to read it to my parents, and they were busy.
Oh.
You know, and I just came into my room and threw a fit and wept, you know, and went back to them and stormed and said I had worked on these characters, I had molded them like statues. You know, I remember saying
An impertinent goat.
that I had, you know, I had shaped them like statues, and you know, they were contrite and they came, you know, not right away because they didn't want to finish watching it, but you know, when they came in, it was like, okay, now, you know, we now we're ready to hear.
Well, you know this. When I think of you, I think of some of the great writers that I love, among whom are the Brontes. And I think about the Brontes and the Gondal sort of stuff.
That's very nice, yes.
That they did. So, you know, that sense of, at a very young age, that family, those girls with this sort of really fully realized imaginative world, right? Anything like that for you? I mean, what were the...
Yeah, my brother and I we ruled over 2 kingdoms of stuffed animals.
Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. His
How did that go?
Well, he was the great Paul. I was the great Laurie. He ruled over North Side, I ruled over South Side.
Were there any ever conflicts or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Though he was much more interested in playing war than I was, because I was never that interested in war, because it was boring.
Did you have narrative going on in a way that he
yeah,
did?
yeah, and we had a national anthem.
Can you sing it now?
Oh, it's the Grand March from Aida.
Oh.
When I was a child, I thought that was the best piece of music ever. So that was the Grand March of his was the Marine hymn. And you know, we had all these animals. We had a lot of animals, and there were different animals who were mayor. I have somewhere in my possession a letter from Timothy Turtle about the Social Security situation, which he says is utterly UDDERLY disgraceful.
Wait, was he aware of his own cleverness with utterly?
No. I just couldn't spell, but he thought the Social Security situation
utterly disgraceful.
Utterly disgraceful, you know. And
can we get a copy of that?
I don't know where it is. I've got it somewhere, but it's also kind of funny for me to look back at, because, you know, he says, for some time now I have thought that the Social Security situation in Animal Town is utterly disgraceful. And then Lenny says something like, and the plan for old people is also not so hot. And I realize I still do that. I still say something really formal.
Then the ironic deflation.
And then
you
slip
do
into
that.
slang. And it's something that I was doing in 4th grade.
Oh, that's so funny.
When I wrote, you know, this letter. But yeah, we had all these animals, and you know, Jumbo Jim, who actually is still upstairs sleeping on my bed,
I'll be darned.
was kind of the king. My brother and I were not kings. You know, Jumbo Jim was the king, and there were mayors. We were gods. We were gods, and they would pray to the great Paul and the great Laurie.
And why shouldn't
you know, and sometimes we interfered with their affairs in benevolent ways. I didn't learn to finish anything until I was in my late 20s. I just wrote beginnings all the time. Beginnings. I just couldn't finish anything.
Huh.
And that's something that I always tell young writers, because my inability to finish anything made me feel like I'd never really be a writer.
Huh.
But I was teaching myself to write.
Yeah.
And I was teaching myself to write. And of course, middles are hell. If you can get the middle right,
I know.
you know, the ending will take care of itself, but the middle is just a swamp. True.
What was the first thing you finished that you feel you finished in your 20s, I guess?
I guess the plays. I finished the plays,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Regency.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about the Night Fairy, and looking out that window, and I'm thinking to myself that the setting of, I'm wondering about the setting of the Night Fairy,
Oh, absolutely, it's my backyard.
Yeah.
When I first came here, I took pictures of the backyard and I lost the photograph, but one of the photographs had this strange bright blot in midair. And people would say, what was it? And I'd say, it's a fairy. And they'd say, it's not a fairy. And I'd say, well, then what is it? And I suppose the first, this was the first time since childhood that I had a little bit of land, so I really watched the garden, and I've had raccoons and possums and woodchucks, and one day there was a great blue heron standing on top of the fence. To see a 4-foot bird standing on, and of course, you're looking out the window, so what you're seeing is its legs, and they're just pure prehistoric legs.
And they're amazing looking.
Yeah, bizarre. But yeah, of course the night fairies.
So did in the sort of progression of your thinking about that, did you think story about a fairy and then I'll set it out back? I mean, how did the pieces of that come together?
Yeah, I thought I'll set it out back, and then I thought, well, why would a fairy live that close to human beings? With all our telephone wires and magnetic fields and
You needed a situation.
rubbish. And so, well, because maybe she couldn't get away, and why couldn't she get away? Well, what if her wings came off? But of course, I was in the middle of Splendors and Glooms when I wrote The Night Fairy.
I don't know if I knew that.
Yeah, it was the summer
It just popped out?
we had to, I was stuck. I didn't know what I was doing, and it was the summer we were renovating the library, so I knew I'd end up moving the books. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll take a little time off Splendors and write something short that I can finish in the summer. So that was part of that.
Did you finish it in the summer? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
On the morning of the best day of her life, Maud Flynn was locked in the outhouse singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. She was locked in because she was being punished. The Barbary Asylum for female orphans was overcrowded. Every room in the wide brick building was in use. There were few places where one could imprison a child who had misbehaved. Maud had a hazy idea that the battle hymn had something to do with war and slavery. She felt that by singing it she was defying authority and striking a blow against the general awfulness of the day.
So, what was your first glimpse of Maud Flynn?
I was ready to go to sleep. I was thinking about orphan stories and how much I love them, and one of the things I loved when I was a child was that the orphan, would just end up taking over everybody's life, and everybody would talk about how wonderful this child was, and, Pollyanna or Anne Shirley, and everybody would, originally there would be some who would be cold and distant, but they would end up in a driveling condition over this wonderful child.
It always happened.
Yeah, so I thought, well, what if there was an orphan who wasn't, a particularly sweet or winning child? I would write a different orphan story. But of course, Maud changes the life of everybody around her. I mean, she brings down the old ladies, and she changes Mrs. Lambert, and she certainly changes Muffet. So,
No, there are sort of conflagrations wherever she goes.
yeah, so actually I ended up writing the same orphan story that everybody writes. But I think when I thought of her as Maud, that was when she had a physical identity. And she was, I could see this wiry person with this rather wispy dark hair, and I had a friend who had a kitten named Maud. And my great-grandmother, who was a hellion by all accounts, was named Maud.
Well, there's a
Maudie.
Maud. There's a Maud in Sweet Masters and Good Ladies.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. And she's a Spitfire. So it's a name for me that, and Maud is sort of half hellion and half little black kitten, because what's more adorable than a little black kitten?
Did this start with the idea of orphan story?
Yeah, and lots of times when I'm telling stories in the middle of the night, I'm getting ready to go to sleep, and so I'm really just looking for a story to amuse me. I don't know that there's going to be one that's going to, and most of the time they don't go anywhere. They're not interesting. I had one a couple of weeks ago, which was really, it was about this fisherman who was almost blind and sort of did everything by feel because he'd been mending nets for years and he'd known the same cove, and it ended up with this, mysterious woman and who seemed to have drowned, and her skirts were like fishtail, and I don't know. That one was pretty interesting, but I never know what I'm going to get. If it's going to be a story that has enough obsession in it to fuel me through the writing process.
So I'm going to ask you a dreadful question, which you should feel free to. Where do those? So you described. You said I never know what I'm going to get, and you described the fisherman's story, which sort of came. I mean, what's your sense of where they come from?
I think maybe I think you need to think that it comes from outside of you. I mean, afterwards you can go back and you can say, oh yes, this was.
Perhaps I can explain it in this
this
way.
is connected to this happening in my childhood, or I mean, you can't get away from yourself. Eventually, you look back and you see that, in this desire to create I think Alden calls it a denarcissized external excrement.
Is that what he said?
Yeah.
That
it's
is
one
so
of his poems.
good.
Yeah. And you think you're getting out of yourself, and then you realize you've come back to where you are. But I don't know anybody who writes who doesn't think that this stuff is outside. It's that muse thing. It's, that it's true. You don't get, sometimes you just pull the same, boring stuff out, and that's easy to recognize as yourself. But then every now and then there's something that's startling and.
Does that feel like a gift?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and mysterious.
Mhm.
And that's when you've got hold of something. And I think people go nuts because they don't have any control. And they don't, where's the next idea coming from? I just finished a big book, and I don't think I'm ever going to think of anything else again. And I remember saying that to you, and you saying, I think from now on your artistic life is going to be pretty tame. And of course I bristled, because
I was kidding.
Yeah, I know you were. You were playing me, and you're right, Of course you were right, but there is another part of me that thinks, I'm not going to get anything else.
Yeah.
This is it. It's over.
So, everybody I talk to at Park has a really interesting sort of story about how they got there. How did you come to Park?
I came to Park doing children's theater. I was with Children's Theater Association. We went from school to school to school, and we were doing The Secret Garden with Cornelia Cody. And I got to Park, and we got laughs that we never had before. The visual humor, not always got laughs, but we got the verbal humor.
Mm-hmm.
The verbal humor got laughs. And I looked at the wonderful artwork in the hall. And I looked at the bathrooms. Because whenever we went to lots of schools where the bathrooms were filthy and there was no hot water and there were no paper towels and children were clearly being treated like animals. And I looked at this artwork and I looked at the kids and I thought I'd like to work here. Oscar Wilde, when I was in high school, which I deeply loathed, I came across Oscar Wilde, and I read a lot of Oscar Wilde, and one of the things he said was that schools should be so beautiful, such wonderful places that the worst thing a child could imagine would be to not be able to go to school. And that was always, I would have loved Park. And I had been a children's librarian at Pratt Free Library for 8 years, and then I'd worked for Baltimore County, so I did know library work.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, librarians, they have to, the media specialists, all that nonsense.
Right.
I applied for admissions, and I was very lucky not to have been hired. Because, with admissions, I'd have to maintain a certain dignity. I wouldn't be able to sit on the floor. Mm-hmm. And whereas I find it quite possible to be extremely honest with Park students.
And undignified.
Yes, very undignified. So I sort of, and then there was an opening for a librarian. The school year had already begun, and
What year was this?
I think it was 91.
Uh-huh.
Been there 20 years now. Last year was my 20th.
Wow. So How do the two, there are more than two, but how do those two parts of your life, sort of librarian at Park School and writer, I mean, how do those two fit? Do they fit together?
They fit together. They fit together well. Partly because the school has been, amazing, really. I mean, the school staked me by letting me have the FACUS, and has been unbelievably kind to me as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I do need the children. I need to see them,
I wonder about
and of
that.
course I have used them as little
Audiences?
guinea pigs for everything from jacket copy to book jackets. I mean, I'm always saying, well, what do you think about this? And they tell me. The Night Fairy. What I didn't know is when I read them, The Night Fairy, there were some kids who would go out at recess and pretend to be the characters. That's the greatest honor, to think that
That's
some,
awesome.
that some of them wanted to be the squirrel. I love that.
So how are Park School students as an audience? What are they like?
Well, it's to begin with, there's the thing that I noticed when I came to do children's theater is they're kids that have been talking and reading and thinking and being exposed to literature from a very early age. So when I came to Park, I realized that the students I'd been telling to 4th and 5th grade, the stories I'd been telling to 4th and 5th grade when I worked in the public library, I could now tell to 2nd grade.
No kidding.
Yeah, oh yeah, because there's a degree of, there was an
Ability to pay
attention
attention.
span, the vocabulary. So there's that. There's the fact that I don't have to start with kind of beginner stuff. I can do some really interesting stuff with these children. But there's also that quality of that children have to give themselves over entirely to a story, and I can see their faces, and some of them just go very far away. And
Can you actually see eyes wide and chin
Yeah.
drop and that kind of stuff?
yeah,
That
I
must
mean,
be
some kids that
wonderful.
yeah, and when I'm telling a story, I might get to something beautiful or a monster or something, and I see their faces reflecting it, and it sometimes makes the hair on my arms stand up, because they got the story in a way that is so real to them that then I start to, feed off sounds so
Oh
parasitic.
no, but I absolutely
But
know what you're talking about.
it starts to come back to me, and
That's how it happens in
there's
theater,
that,
right?
yeah, and there's that moment of there are these turning points in stories which are revelations, and you see that reflected in their faces. And of course, with young children, there's also the quality of they didn't know it was going to happen. I mean, sometimes young children, it's a tremendous relief that that the younger brother who is kind, is the one who is going to
Oh, it's a
be
genuine
freed,
relief or a
from the
genuine
dungeon.
shock.
Yeah, so there's both that quality of innocence in Park students, of being young, of being able to completely let the imagination soar, with a kind of sophistication that comes from the fact that they've had books and sophisticated verbal exchanges from very early age.
So you've won some awards, and you won the Newbery
I won
Award.
the Newbery Award.
So
It's going to be on my tombstone.
so what was that like?
Well, I happen to have the award here.
Would you show?
Yeah. I actually first, at the Newbery banquet, which is like 1,200 people, they give you this, and you give your speech, and I gave my speech. And then afterwards there's a receiving line, but between the receiving line and the speeches, they give you 3 minutes to go to the bathroom. So I first opened this in the bathroom. And I was so pleased it had all these layers.
That's nice. It ought to be nice.
And it's not fair, because the people who win the honors, they get plaques. I think if I'm ever really rich, I'm going to make sure they get a medal too, because the honor is really just as good in some ways, and they should have a medal.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's my medal.
May I hold that in my
Yeah,
hand?
for the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children. That has my name on it.
Is the camera there? That is so beautiful. It has a nice heft to it too.
Yeah, it does.
No, it does. It should. For the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children. Very nice. So, are you looking forward to winning any more Newbery
Lightning
Awards?
does not strike twice. This was amazing. This was, it was an astonishment.
So, what's the response at Park been like to your success with the award and with the books coming out? I mean, do kids know?
Oh yeah, they know.
Mhm.
And I mean, the day that I won was amazing.
Mhm.
And
At about 6:30 that morning, January 14th, 2008, Hillary Jacobs called me at home and said she did it. And I screamed. My daughter, who was home for some reason, heard me and came running down and wanted to know what was wrong. The idea that Laura had won a Newbery Award it's not inconceivable, because she should have won it, she deserved it. The fact that they'd actually given it to her was unbelievable and marvelous. Seeing her later that day, we couldn't wait for her to come in, and we saw her when she came in, and it was a wonderful moment.
it was pretty overwhelming to come into the gymnasium, and
Oh God, I do remember that day.
yeah, and I mean, I didn't even want to do that at first. I was, so happily freaked out and felt like, and I remember Michael Eames saying, you will do this because this is also the school's day to celebrate.
Michael Eames.
And he was great. He was wonderful. And then, to walk in and I think it was the paper chains that got to me. I mean, the first graders had made paper chains, and they started wrapping me in paper chains.
Oh.
And that was, and then, just to see, they were all really happy for me and on my side.
Yeah.
And that was, and kids made me cards, and there were 3 little girls in first grade who made a Newbery medal that's about this big.
Oh, do you still have it?
I do have it, but it's folded up in one of these big books,
Huh.
and I'm not sure which one. But and they colored it in with gold magic marker. For first graders, like coloring so that the whole thing is gold, and it was
It's a
amazing
big deal.
what they had done. And then what I also appreciated was that after about a week, they'd sort of forgotten about it.
Oh,
and
like
it
your
became,
parents.
And it became the place where, that being with them was the place where it wasn't weird, because,
Mhm.
they wanted me to find them their book.
Mhm.
And I was telling stories, as I have always told stories, and what is between me and them was genuine and is genuine and did not change.
Yeah, they could be both really happy for you
Yeah, and then
and still be exactly who they were.
yeah.
That's nice.